My name is Natalie I. I'm 24 years old. I was born and raised in Tucson, Arizona. I identify as Ghanaian American. Both my parents are from Ghana. I'm first generation. I'm not a student. I graduated university in 2018 and I currently work in refugee resettlement, which I really enjoy. It's a really fulfilling environment and position to be in. So being American, Ghanaian, Black in Tucson was really interesting for me, especially growing up, because it was like not only was I Black, but then I was also African. So then with that came a whole nother slew of things that I didn't necessarily prepare for and that my parents couldn't have prepared me for because they didn't grow up here. You know what I mean? And they didn't think that saying I'm African or identifying as African would come with the things that it came with growing up, right? So Tucson in certain areas is a very diverse place. And in certain areas, it's not. And I grew up in the suburbs, so there was almost no diversity in the suburbs, right? So if there are Black kids, then we're all related. We all have to be cousins, in school. And even before going to public school, I went to private Christian school, which was a really, really interesting experience. I mean, literally the only other Black people in school were my siblings and my dad, because my dad was a teacher at that school. It was a lot, I think, growing up like that. And I think that if I hadn't gone to college, I don't think that I would be as comfortable and confident identifying as Ghanaian American Black woman and being so proud of that if I hadn't had those experiences in college. And, growing up just being, that Black girl with a bunch of white people all the time, right? It's like you want to do everything that you can to fit in. You want to straighten your hair. You want to wear the right clothes. You want to say the right things. You want to eat the right stuff. And it even came down to like eating stuff, right? Like my mom used to make African food in the house all the time. And I remember one time I'd packed something, my mom had packed me something for lunch for school. And that person had gone to school and somebody had made fun of me about the food I was eating, that the food that I ate stunk, and that it looked gross or whatever. But really it was just like spinach, tomatoes, and salmon, like normal stuff. There was nothing weird about it. But just because it was different than what those people were used to, it wasn't a TV dinner, it wasn't mac and cheese. So it was a problem for them and they felt like they needed to make fun of me for that. And I mean, I got called all kinds of things and that was in private Christian school, right? So in private Christian school, I always felt like I didn't fit in. I always knew that I was Black and I was always going to be different than everybody else because I was Black. And it was because other kids let me know that, you know what I mean? So I would get called all kinds of things: ape, monkey, gorilla, blah, 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 this and that. People would make fun of my lips, my hair. I mean, whatever you could think of that would set me apart from everybody else because I was Black, somebody was going to point it out, And so that was a really interesting experience growing up in Christian school where people are supposed to love each other and blah, 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 And so that was hard. And then the other thing that I felt like I noticed, again, relating back to Michelle's story, was I think teachers always treated me more maturely than they treated other children. I felt like teachers always treated me like I was an adult, or they treated me a little bit harsher than they treated other children. Like if a child made a mistake, a white kid made a mistake, then they understood it as a child. But if I made a mistake, I was supposed to know better. And I felt like I got punished harsher for it, or not even punished harsher for that, but also embarrassed. Like it was made known to everybody that I made this mistake. And that could have also been because my dad was a teacher, but I really, looking back at it now, I think that it was more so a race thing. And I even had a 4th grade teacher who told me that I wouldn't, amount to anything, or that I wasn't as smart as other kids. In her class too, we had to watch like the Ruby Bridges story. And I'm in 4th grade, so how old are you even in 4th grade? I don't even know what age that is, but it's like what, like maybe 7? I remember like having a breakdown watching this Ruby Bridges movie because it's like that little girl looks like me. And then if this was a few years ago, I wouldn't have been able to go to school and I would have had to go through something like that. And so it was triggering for me. And it was kind of like I was sent to the bathroom to like go cry by myself. Like it's not like she checked on me or like she asked if I was okay or anything like that. And she was just always really hard on me, even though like my dad was her colleague, and it was just always like I wouldn't amount to anything. And then in the 5th grade, my dad had pancreatic cancer, and my 5th grade teacher told me in front of a class full of students that don't think just because your dad has cancer, I won't call your house because I didn't submit homework, So situations like that make me feel like if it was a white child, you wouldn't have talked to that child that way. But because I am a Black child, you feel like you can speak to me that way, or you can treat me like that. And that teacher later on, like further down the road, she apologized and stuff. And like she came to my dad's funeral, which was weird because my dad passed away when I was in 5th grade. So the same year she said that, my dad died. It was one of those things that kind of stuck with you. I ended up going to public school, which was a much better setting for me because there were other people that looked like me in public school. So it was easier to have people that I relate to and people that I got along with. And in elementary school, I think people were a little bit more accepting. Middle school also, I like all my friends in middle school were Black, and then they were all guys. So then it was like there was no real issues because who doesn't get along with guys, right? So there was that. And then high school was great. And high school is where I met like my best friend Kajal, who also has like two identities because, she's Black American, but she's also Indian American, and then she has to find ways to fit in. And so her and I really connected on that level of like having these two identities that not only do we have to explain to people, but then we also have to find where we fit amongst those two identities. And again, being Ghanaian American, I was too American for the Ghanaians, but I was too African for the Americans. And then I was too Black for white people. So it's kind of like I really had to find somewhere where I fit. And I found that in college, in the African Student Association, where it was like, not only did these people look like me, but they were African the same way I was African. So then they were African American, they're Nigerian American. Their parents were born in Nigeria, raised in Nigeria, and then they were born here. And they lived in the suburbs, and they went to all-white high school. So we all had that to connect with, and we could all identify with each other in that way. And I think that that's what made me who I am. And I really don't think I would be the person that I am if I didn't have those experiences and have those friends. And I mean, I tell them all the time, like, you guys changed my life. I wouldn't be me without you guys, because that's how we all kind of identified like silly things together, like Afro beats and stuff. Like we loved Afro beats, and we would all like have parties and we'd only play Afro beats, and we'd like have times where we would do stuff for the ASA. So we would cook together. So we all learned how to cook African food too, and really take pride in that part of our identities. And, we had these fashion shows where we were only wearing African clothes. We were spreading that culture also to our campus, and like seeing other people on our campus who weren't African or who weren't even Black participate in that, and then also be really excited about it was really exciting for me and really fulfilling for me. And I think it also really like boosted my confidence, not only as a Black woman, but also as an African American, Ghanaian American woman in general. I think that that's something that I've kind of had to process and come along with, because I always just said I was Ghanaian. Like, that's just how my parents taught me. And it was just always something that was instilled for me from a young age. Like, all I ever remember is like being from Ghana. Like, that's all I've ever, you know what I mean? Like, I've always known that my family was from Ghana. I've never had to ask my parents where we're from or who they are. Like, it's just been something that my parents have always put at the forefront of our identities, whether that be through food, through music, through even like the way they pray. Like, there's just something about like an African prayer that is not the same as anybody else's prayer that like my parents are not from here. You know what I mean? Or just things that happen in the house. You hear your parents wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday to yell at you to talk on the phone to your aunties and uncles in Ghana, So you see things that make you know that that's who you are, that's where you're from. These are the things that build up your identity, right? Which, when I was growing up and I was only around white people, it was fine for me to say I was Ghanaian because nobody ever really questioned it. Like, everybody knew my family was from Ghana. Sometimes they'd then ask me like, oh, how long have you been here? And then I would say I was born here, and they'd be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But then when I got around more African people, especially my Ghanaian friends, shout out to them, who are from Ghana directly, when I would say I was Ghanaian, it was like, no, but you're American. You're not Ghanaian because you weren't born in Ghana, and you don't speak the language, or you don't do this, or you don't eat that, so you can't be Ghanaian, There were parts of me that were not satisfactory for Ghanaian people from Ghana, right? I didn't meet the qualifications that they needed for me to be able to consider myself a Ghanaian. And nobody ever meant it in like a malicious way, I don't think. It was always in a joking way, but it bothered me because I felt like, this is who I am, I might not be as Ghanaian as you, but I wasn't born in Ghana, but I identify with my Ghanaian side because no matter how American I am growing up in America, there are things that my Ghanaian parents never let me forget. So yes, like going to school and doing things outside, I'm American, but at home, I'm Ghanaian just like you. The same beatings you got, I got. The same food you ate, I ate. I might not have always liked it, and I still don't like it, but it was something that was prepared in the house. Like, I know what these things are, And so that's something that I've always kind of struggled with. It's kind of irritated me, and it's been a really soft spot for me, I think. Because I even had a friend who had mentioned at a point that like she had a friend who was like me, she was born in America, but she's Ghanaian, but she spoke the language, right? So it was different because it was like she could relate to that friend on a different level because that friend spoke the language. And then she had another friend who was also like me who didn't speak the language. So sometimes when they'd have like these all Ghanaian events or Ghanaian parties and stuff, they wouldn't necessarily invite that friend who didn't speak the language because then they have to speak English, even though English is a primary language in Ghana, but they didn't want to have to invite that girl because they didn't want to have to speak English, right? Because then it wasn't a Ghanaian event anymore. And so there are times where I don't get invited to certain things that people are doing, and I always wondered what that was, but then hearing her say that, I was like, oh, I guess it makes sense. Like, there are certain things that you're going to eat that I'm not going to eat, or there are certain things that you're going to talk about that I'm not going to understand because I wasn't born in Ghana. But for me, that wasn't a reason to exclude me or anybody who identifies as Ghanaian or African from something that you're doing because they're different than you, So I think that bridge between African and American, especially here in America, is really hard to walk, because sometimes it's like Black people don't want you because you talk different, you behave differently, you think you're better than everybody else because you're African, right? But then African people don't want you because you don't speak the language, you don't eat everything that we eat, you don't do certain things that we do, you don't behave certain ways that we behave. And so it was really, for me, again, finding that group of people that I did fit with, who also identified as Nigerian American, Ghanaian American, Somali American, Kenyan American, whatever it was, or the people who were not going to judge me based off the fact that I didn't do things the way that they did. And even when I first met Rosie, my fiance, to begin with, he used to give me grief about that. Like, oh, you're not African, you're American, And I used to always tell him, like, I don't like that, So we've come a long way from that, but he used to always give me issues for it too. So it was kind of a funny transitioning and growing up. And then eventually, when he saw the way that people behaved toward me because of that, then he understood why it bothered me, because he would see me get left out of things, or he would see me like not invited to places, or people not talk to me, or people not want to be friends with me the way that they were friends with each other, because I wasn't as African as them. I wasn't African enough. That's been a point of contention for me, I think, my whole life. I felt oftentimes like I'm not enough because I'm not Black enough for Black American people, and I'm not African enough for African people. So there were a group of women who I am friends with. I'm still friends with them. We all know each other. We're all friends, right, in this group. And some of us are closer than others, but I felt like when I'm with everybody individually, I have a very specific relationship with them. But then when everybody got together, it kind of felt like them and then me, right? And majority of them, all of them actually, were born on the continent, and majority of them from West Africa. And so that situation always kind of confused me, and I always wondered what it was about me that made me always kind of get left out or excluded, or what the problem was. And as I kind of asked more questions or made more observations, it kind of turned out that it was a matter of I didn't speak the language and I didn't eat the things that they like to eat. And it was because they were having fufu parties, right? And fufu is the type of food that we eat in West Africa, or other parties involving food where they felt like I wouldn't want to eat that kind of food, and so they just wouldn't invite me, period. And for me, that was frustrating or upsetting, because it was like, let me make the decision on my own. I'm an adult, so if I come and I don't eat, it doesn't really matter. At least I still get to hang out with you guys and spend time with you guys, But just like disqualifying me because you think I'm not gonna like something without talking to me first or without inviting me, it was really frustrating for me, because I just felt like I'm not the kind of person that just won't, like if I come to where you're at and you serve me food or you ask me if I want to eat, I'm not the kind of person that just won't eat at all. You know what I mean? If you give me something, I'll eat it, I'll try it, I'll make the effort. But I just felt frustrated that I would get excluded from things based off the fact that, like, I didn't speak the language, which was a circumstance out of my control. I didn't choose that. It was chosen for me. And I didn't eat a certain type of food, which is a preference thing, right? We all have things we don't like. So I wouldn't exclude you from an event because you don't eat salad, and I like salad, Or just like we have friends who are vegan or vegetarian, we don't completely, or you shouldn't completely exclude them from something because they don't eat the way we do, So it was a really frustrating situation for me. And then it just kind of taught me that I'm going to have the people that love me and care about me for who I am. And then I'm going to have the people who were cool, but we're never going to have a certain type of relationship. Or I think that what it really boiled down to for me was that I was never going to have the same kind of relationship with these friends as they have with each other, because they can relate to each other and they feel like I can't relate to them. And when I say I can relate, everybody's shocked, right? Or they doubt that I can actually relate. Like I mentioned earlier, I love to cook, and food is a big thing in our African communities. And so when I say that I made, I don't know, jollof rice, something really simple, right? Everybody knows how to make jollof rice. And they're like, oh, Natalie, you know how to make jollof rice? You? And I'm like, yes, everybody knows how to make jollof rice. It's a simple thing to do. Everybody can do it. And so there's just kind of this ongoing doubt of me and my capability or my capacity to do things that African people, or specifically African women, should do. The older I get, the more I'm able to navigate that identity of what it means to be African and what it means to be Ghanaian American. It also comes with a lot of bumps and bruises. And I think that to certain levels, I can still relate to my Black friends, but I feel like there are things that they feel like I'm never going to understand, which is true. And there are things that they're never going to understand, which is also true. I think that that's really important to recognize, especially in looking at your identity and looking at where you fit in and walking that line and just navigating that space, right? Because it's just a big, huge gray area. And I think that's what it'll always be. And I think that my brother brought that to my attention of, as Africans, we really have to do a good job of hearing and respecting our Black community, because the truth is we're all Black, right? But there are things about the Black community that we are never going to understand as Africans, ever. And we owe them the respect to hear them and to support them in that. And I thought that was really interesting. He told me that when I was like probably 17. And so at that time, I don't know what was going on or why he mentioned it. It didn't, I mean, certain parts of it clicked for me, but certain parts of it didn't. I think the older that I've gotten and the more that I've seen and the more that I've heard, I think that it's clicked more, because even till now, and I'm sure you've probably had this happen to you as well, but it's like, okay, yes, you're Black, but you're different because you're African. You're not the same as a Black person. And it's like, but I am the same as a Black person, and I am a Black person, you know, but there are those factors that we have to understand that they're not the same, and we will never understand them. So I think that that's something that I struggle with, that of being a Black woman and then being an African woman and being an African American woman and a Ghanaian American woman. And it's just, there are all these labels and all these boxes that, because I have all these labels on my identity, I have to fit into all these boxes that I rarely fit into. So my dad was a grammar teacher, so he was the kind of person that if you said, hey, Dad, can I have some cookies? He would say, I don't know, can you? And you'd have to say, hey, Dad, may I have some cookies? Or if I was talking about my brother, I would say, hey, Dad, me and Kwame, blah, blah, blah. And he'd be like, no, Kwame and I. And so it was like we always had to change those things, and he would always correct us on stuff like that. So we always spoke a certain way. And because we spoke that way, it was a problem. It was from the very beginning of my life, really, that I knew I wasn't Black enough, because I remember even in elementary school, you know, people were always like, oh, you're such an Oreo. Look at the way you talk. Look at the way you dress, blah, blah, blah. You're an Oreo. Or people would tell me, I've literally been told multiple times, you're a white girl trapped inside a Black girl's body. And even like, again, like African people have told me that because I did ballet, you know, but ballet isn't for Black people. Ballet isn't for African people. And so that's another thing with like our communities, both Black and African, is like we put these labels on things that are not for us. But what does that mean? Like, if you love ballet and you're good at it, then you love ballet and you're good at it, you know? And then you're a Black woman who loves ballet. That's it, you know? But it was like, because I went to ballet after school, or because I was a tap dancer or whatever, I wasn't Black enough for those reasons. Those were all things that made me not Black. Even though I think people would have assumed, like, the dance studio was one of the places where my color was never brought up, ever. And that's one of the things and one of the reasons that like I look back on that and it shocks me. Like I never had anybody say anything racist or derogatory toward me in the dance studio ever. And if it was anything, it was always that I was so beautiful. You know, it was like everybody in the dance studio always thought I was gorgeous, or they always thought that like when I danced, it was different than somebody else or whatever. You know, it was never anything discriminatory or to make me feel uncomfortable. That was one of the safest, that was honestly one of the safest, if not the safest place for me growing up, because I was never left out of anything. I was always included there. I always felt like I had a family there. And it really, that is another part of what shaped me to be who I am, is dancing in that dance studio. And I was the only Black girl. I really was. And it was cool because I was older too. And I grew up in that dance studio. So then there would be like other little Black girls who would come in and then they'd want to take pictures with me and stuff, or they'd be so happy to see me, or they would want to be like me, even though I wasn't the best dancer. You know, I was never the Sugar Plum Fairy or anything like that, but it was just cool that I got to be in a space that like also inspired other little girls, even if they didn't know that they were inspired by me at that time. It was just like they just saw me and I looked like them and it excited them, you know? I think what you said is exactly right. Like people don't expect you to be in those spaces because people that look like me haven't been in those spaces. But I think that we're at a point in time where people need to adjust to that on both sides. People who don't look like me need to adjust to seeing people who do look like me in those spaces. And people who do look like me need to also get adjusted to seeing people who look like me in those spaces. So I think that the beauty standards and the way that people approach beauty standards are real. And I think that it exists in the Black community and outside the Black community. I had Black men tell me that I couldn't be a I couldn't be an African-American girl. They knew I wasn't African-American when they saw me because I'm too pretty to be an African-American girl. And somebody actually told me that and expected me to like be flattered. And I was insulted because it was like, what do Black American women look like? And I am a Black American woman, you know, like I am African-American. What is it that they look like that I don't look like, that you're saying that I look better than somebody else because of your preconceived notion of what a Black American woman looks like? You know, so it was like he wanted me to say I was African. And when I said it, then he's like, yeah, I knew you weren't African-American. I knew you weren't from here.
Was this person
No, he was black. American. From Georgia, with a black mother and a black sister, a couple black sisters. And then I also had people in high school tell me, like white people or Mexican people as well, tell me, you're really beautiful for a black girl. And it's like, okay, well, you're really beautiful for somebody who's 100 pounds overweight. Like, what? You know what I mean? Like, it's a backhanded compliment either way. So if you wouldn't say it to somebody else, like I think that you have to think about those things, right? Like, if you wouldn't say to a white person, you're really pretty for a white girl, then don't say it to me, you know? Or if you wouldn't say to an overweight person, you're really pretty for somebody who's overweight, or you're really pretty for a big girl, you know? Like, what does that mean? And so it's these beauty standards and these things. And I also have people tell me, like, oh, I would go to prom with you, but I don't date black girls. Or I would take you out, but I don't date black girls. Or black men who have told me I don't date black girls. My parents came here, my dad came here for school. And my mom came here because she married my dad. So she came here to be with my dad because they'd been married in Ghana. I hear a lot of different things around immigration, right? And immigrants in general, I hear a lot of things about. And this is something that we talk about a lot as a family, right? If you took an American who talks badly about people who had to immigrate here or come here as a refugee or an asylum seeker or whatever capacity that they had to come here as, if you took that person and left them in the place that whoever came from for 10 days, it would put so much in perspective for them as to why people come here and seek better opportunities. But it shouldn't take that for you to understand. It should take you being open and willing enough to have conversations with people who immigrate here and to see what their points of view are for you to understand why they came here. And I think that especially for me, working in refugee resettlement, you know, one thing that irritates me and frustrates me to my core are those people who are like, well, they chose to come here, so they have to assimilate and they have to do things this way, they have to do things that way. And I'm like, okay, well, if you did any kind of research at all, especially in regards to refugees, you would know that like refugees don't get to get a brochure, right? And they don't get to have a brochure where they choose, okay, I want to go to Tucson, Arizona, I want to go to America, you know? There are plenty of refugees in refugee camps who don't even know where America is. They don't even know what the American dream is. They don't even know that a place called Tucson, Arizona exists. You know, they don't choose that. And a lot of times when it comes to refugee status individuals, they don't know where they're going until the day before they come here or the day before they go to wherever they're going. And so it's not like they go to a travel agency, they buy a ticket, and they choose where they want to go. That's one of the things that I've heard so much that makes me so upset, is the fact that like, these people are fleeing for their lives and the safety of their families, you know? And it's not like they chose to do that. And if you took half of the refugee families that you meet in this country and asked them if their country was safe and they had opportunities there, would they stay there? They would tell you yes. And that's one thing that I've realized a lot of the time in my work, especially with a lot of like our Middle Eastern and South Asian clients that we have. It's like they had jobs, they had careers, they lived great lives before whatever it was came that destabilized their country and forced them out of their country. And if they could go back to the time before that destabilization, they would go back to that time and they would want to stay in their countries. So I think that like Americans have this big ego and sense of like our country is the greatest country in the world and everybody wants to come here and people want to come here because yidi da da da. And it's like, no, if people could stay where they were from, if they had opportunities in their countries, they would stay there. If it was safe for them in their countries, they would stay there. A lot of times that's what happens. And like my fiance, he till this day wants to go back to his country, and I'm like, well, I don't know if I want you to go back to your country, you know, but he's always telling me that like if it was safe, I would love to be back there. Or like he wants to go back there and make it safe for other people so that they can stay there, so that the country can grow and have stability. And so I think that a lot of the conversations around immigration in our country are from ignorance and fear. So like you can't force somebody to care or understand something that does not impact them or that they haven't experienced. It takes a lot for you to get somebody to have a reaction to that. That's been a really tough pill for me to swallow because I'm the kind of person that I see things differently and I see things from a lot of people's points of view. Like I make a conscious effort to hear other people, hear their stories, hear their experiences, have conversations. And I think that that's something that I've realized that not everybody's like that. People don't generally do that, you know, and it's been really hard for me, I think, especially in now working so closely to refugees and just like having those experiences and hearing their stories and being a part of like telling those stories, I just think that like, I'm like, if you would have just had a conversation with this person, you know what I mean? You wouldn't put such a terrible label on them, or you wouldn't have thought these things about people like them, you know, if you would have just listened. I think that as much as I would really, really, really like to have hope and believe that things are like changing for the better, I just don't, I'm not sure, you know, I'm really not sure. And I think that this isn't the first time this has happened, and it won't be the last time. And I think that Americans like to do that, right? Like we like to put a bunch of attention on this issue and a bunch of spotlights and news and all kinds of stuff on this issue for it to be important and it to be relevant and to make impact and change. And then people want to do things so that they feel like they're making impact and change. But then they've done that thing, you know? I did it when this happened, and like you'll look back, right? In 2025, people will look back well, in 2020, I donated $10 to Black Lives Matter. Or in 2020, I was a part of painting the street for Black Lives Matter. And I did my part, you know? But that's not where your part stops. Your part isn't only about being a part of a movement as a whole. Your part is about what you do individually in your everyday life, in your everyday business, and every part of whatever you do every day. That's what your part is. Your part isn't just about putting on a Black Lives Matter t-shirt and wearing it to Costco. That's not it. It doesn't end there. And so I think that that's what I feel like is lacking for me, is that seeing people change in their everyday life and their everyday thoughts. And that goes to people that are close to us as well, friends and family. And I think that we also have to like be truthful with the people that we're close to and like straighten them out when they're out of line, you know, tell them the truth. I think that in the simplest way that I could possibly say this is when Rosie goes to the grocery store and I'm sitting in the car and he's in there for longer, he's going to get a pack of water and he's in there for longer than the amount of time that I've calculated for him to be in there, I start worrying, right? Why is he in there for so long? Why is he not coming out? To the point where sometimes I will get out of the car and go look for him in the store, right? And that is a result of me growing up as a Black child in America and having my family members constantly labeled as threats, right? And not even family members, friends, people that we know, all sorts of things have happened in our family and to people that we're close to. And it's always that we're perceived as a threat every single time. And so my thing is that if you don't want to understand anything else, just understand that like Black people in this country live in almost an alternate reality of what you live in. You know, it's like we don't even live in the same place. The things that you don't even have to think about, we've thought twice about. And it's not like you don't even have to look very far. You know what I mean? It happens in your everyday life where like you have to make a conscious effort to be a better person and to not clench your bag when I come and sit down next to you, to not pick up your kids and scurry away when I walk past you in the grocery store, to not walk all the way around the grocery store when you see me walking towards you in the apple aisle. Black Lives Matter as a movement is exactly what the phrase is. It's not anything other than that. It's not anything more than that. It's not anything less than that. It's exactly what the phrase is. It's that Black Lives Matter, and people need to know and understand that and do what they can to protect Black people. And also, like, a big thing for me is like for white people to understand, like, you single-handedly have the power to control what happens to a Black person. When my brother is moving into a house in Phoenix, in a nice area, okay, downtown Phoenix, his neighbors shouldn't call the police on him to report a burglary because they don't think he can afford to live there, which has happened multiple times. That person that called the police, my brother could have been killed that day. And it could have been because that person called because they didn't think that based off what he looked like, he could afford to live in that area. And so it's just like somebody could have literally lost their life that day. Like, thank God he didn't. But like, my brother he's a hothead. He has a temper, you know? So he was pissed when the police showed up. He was mad. And he made it known that he wasn't happy. And like, thank God that day, it wasn't a weak police officer who was intimidated by an angry Black man. But imagine if it had been.